So here we are in part 3 of this series entitled How to Believe. And the idea of this is that we are taught that how a man thinks, so he becomes. That the results that we see in our life come from the thoughts that we think. And so this series is about how to go about taking a look at what you think and what you believe, discovering what it is and seeing how it plays a role in your life, and then intentionally seeking out what you'd like to believe in order to achieve the results that you're looking for. So basically what happens is this: we walk clients through this stuff all the time, and they see, okay, this is what I'm believing, this is why I have the results in my life, and they have these epiphanies. Whoa, I see exactly how this is happening. And then we're like, what would you like to believe instead? Or what would you like to be doing instead? And we work their way back and we find this belief, and they're like, oh my gosh, if I just believed that, that would set me free from all of these things. But how do I do that? How do I go about believing something that I don't believe? And so that's sort of the reason why I took on this podcast to begin with. So in episode 1, we took a look at all of that, why this is important, what's the value of being able to believe. In number 2, in part 2, we took a look at the actual tools that Whit and I teach regarding how to go about believing something. And then in this episode, in part 3, the last one, we're going to take a look at the skills that are required to use those tools. So just to sort of put that in perspective, last week we looked at like the hammer, the screwdriver, the drill. We kind of went through the tools and then you can kind of know what they are, but that doesn't necessarily make you good at using them. And that's probably one of the biggest mistakes that we see our clients make, is they think that just because they're aware of the existence of a tool, it means they should now have mastery of it. But the truth is, if you think about using a hammer, you're going to have to practice with it. Like once you understand that it's for nails, that's great. You know that when you see a screw or a bolt, you don't grab your hammer. That when you see a nail, that's when you grab your hammer. So you know when to use it, but you still may be bending nails and missing, maybe even hitting your thumb in the process of becoming talented and becoming skillful at actually using that hammer. And then getting into even more advanced skills where you have like carpentry techniques and you have ways to solve problems that are much more complicated. So, sort of coming out of the analogy, that's what we want to be looking at. We've got these tools of how to go about believing, but we want to take a look at the skills that are involved and become aware of the skills that we want to be building in order to use those tools. Now, the difference between a skill and a tool is that a skill is something that you have. It's yours. You may have your hammer on you, you may not, but your skill is yours. Your knowledge of how to do it, the reps that you've had, the talent that you've developed in order to be able to use this thing is available. And so what ends up happening is that a skilled carpenter may look at a project and be like, I know exactly what to do here. I just need a hammer. And so then he goes and gets his hammer, whereas someone else may just be looking at a bunch of tools and like, I'm not sure what to do. I'm not sure where to start. And so this idea of building skills, it's really no different in your mindset than it is in carpentry, or it would be in painting or singing or sports. It's just repetition. It's just practice, getting in and practicing these skills. And I think it's a valuable thing to do, because if I were to look at maybe say 3 things that I believe skills at believing offer you, I think the first one is empowerment. It becomes a way that you see the world where you don't feel obligated to the story that you're in. You begin to understand that you have options and how to execute those options. And so it's a pretty cool way to, just sort of feel powerful no matter what is going to come your way in life. You don't spend your time kind of scanning for danger because you feel powerful about whatever may come your way. The next one I would say is resilience. Because what ends up happening is that you start to understand the dynamic of how you can turn the dials on belief, and that belief makes you feel a certain way. And so when you look at the hard things in life, the things that may make you quit to be not resilient, the idea is that you're looking at it and it looks too hard. It's too intimidating. You don't want to climb that mountain because it looks like just too much. But if you understand that it doesn't have to be miserable the whole time, you're not obligated to suffering, you don't have to dread the action that you're going to take, you actually can adjust the fuel that you're taking action from. Suddenly you're more open to going after bigger things, to climbing bigger mountains, to chasing down bigger goals, to dreaming bigger about your life, because it's just not so intimidating. It doesn't look so hard out there. And the last thing it offers you is peace, because you can believe on purpose that things work. I mean, when you look into the future, there are really only two options: optimism or pessimism. Either it's going to work or it's not going to work. And no one knows the answer. You're just believing, no matter which way you look out there. And when we can grab onto beliefs like God is real, that he loves us, that he's our Father, that he's on our side, that his plans are for our good, then I can start to learn the skill of choosing to believe that whether I can see it or not, whether I understand it or not, God is working for my good. That whatever I'm going through now, I could see, it gives me peace to think that it's for my good, that it's for a reason, it has a purpose, it has meaning. And if I just stick it through, if I can just keep going, if I can just walk through this, there will be a bright side. It will end up being for my good. Even when I don't see how that could possibly be the case. That's actually the most important part for the skill, because the skill we're talking about is believing. And the space where believing comes in your life, it's sort of at the end of knowing. When it can't be known, your only option is to believe. And you're either going to believe it's going to go well or it's going to go poorly. So what I want to break down in this podcast / video today are the 5 skills that we're going to be building. And I'm going to try to go a little faster. Part 2 got really long for some reason. I promise I'll try to be quicker, more succinct in this one. So I'm going to run through them real quick so you've got them. The first is the skill of perspective. Being able to get a little bit of distance from the emotion that's being triggered by what you're thinking, so that you can have the freedom to evaluate the thinking without carrying along all the emotion all the time. I'm not saying you're going to become a robot, but just being able to temporarily sort of suspend that by gaining some distance and perspective from your situation. The second one is the skill of focus. And so this one's going to partner with the tool of specificity that we talked about in the last video. This is where you're going to be really intentionally choosing where your growth area is and what you're working towards, so that you don't accidentally set out to grow in one area of your life and then judge yourself for not growing in another. The third is the skill of self-trust. And this is redefining success. Success is not arrival. Success is always taking the next step. You're going to learn that you can do what you say, that you can have your own back, that you can keep on going no matter what. The fourth is the skill of emotional maturity, of being able to take radical responsibility for all of the things in your life and be willing to feel the emotion that comes along with it. You may recall in that last video, we talked about building your capacity for disappointment. This skill that is built with that tool of having a large capacity for disappointment, the skill is emotional maturity. And the fifth one is the skill of self-respect, self-admiration, self-esteem. This is speaking to yourself with the same standards you would apply when you're speaking to others. When we master these 5 skills, we actually have the ability to create any life that we want, to create any outcomes in our life that we want, because we now have the skill of believing what we want, of thinking what we choose. To help you with this, I'm just going to dive in a little bit deeper into each one. So that's sort of an overview, and now I just want to give you a little bit more on each of those skills. So the first one we talked about was the skill of perspective. I like to think of this one as coaching, really. Coaching is mostly perspective. If you think about sports coaching, which we're probably most familiar with, you've got players who are on the field and you've got players who are on the sideline. Or even better, if you ever watch football, you've got players who are up in a press box. They're up higher looking down on the game specifically because they want a different perspective than the person who's in the game. If I'm a quarterback and I'm looking out, I see on one perspective what the defense looks like, whereas up in the press box, they're looking down and they have a literal different perspective. And so they can see adjustments and they can come up with strategies that are unavailable to the quarterback who's looking at it from his perspective. Then they call them on that little phone you probably see on the sideline, they talk about things, go over whatever they're going to do next. Well, we want to be able to do that on our journeys as well, except that if we're not in a coaching program, we are responsible for shifting our own perspective. We are both coach and player. And so the idea I want you to visualize here is that everything that happens in your life is always involving 2 people. There's the you that is experiencing it, going through it, doing the actions, feeling the emotions. And then there is the you that's sort of watching. And the one that's watching is assigning meanings to what's going on. They're watching for other patterns that are repeating or kind of predicting where this is going to go in the future. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? So you're on one hand experiencing it going through life, and on the other hand, you're kind of judging yourself and judging the actions as either good or bad. And what you want to do is keep your watcher curious. Whit describes it as turning the watcher green. So you could have like a black watcher that's very like judgmental and worried and filled with fear and pointing, you're doing it wrong. And what that does is it prevents you from taking good action. But if you can turn your watcher green, it's like green means go, right? Is the idea. The watcher is curious. The watcher wants to know what's behind these actions. It wants to understand the motivation for these dials. It builds curiosity. And so when you can get that distance, when you can take a look at the thoughts that you're thinking from your watcher, your green watcher perspective, what happens is the emotions that come with that thought aren't triggered quite so easily. And so a thought like, oh, I'm thinking that I'm unqualified. I can't do any of these things because I don't have the qualifications that the other people have. Or when I look out, I see everyone else in this industry, they know something that I don't. I'm behind and I'm playing catch up without feeling like, oh no, I'm behind and I'm playing catch up in my industry. Like, no, that's interesting. I feel curious about that. Is that really true that I'm behind and playing catch up? And so that's sort of the first skill, is gaining enough distance to be able to evaluate without being all wrapped up in your emotion. The second one we talked about was the skill of focus. This one's really important, and I saw it in sports coaching all the time, is that I would watch another coach often, or I would be coached, and the coach would say, I want you to focus on moving your feet to the ball. And so then I would fail and fail and fail, and then I would do it right, and I would do the footwork properly. But when the ball came, maybe it still didn't have the result that I wanted if I was like trying to pass in volleyball or something like that. And so the ball didn't go there. And so then the coach would say, you got to drop your inside shoulder and lock out your platform. And all of a sudden now I'm being critiqued on something I wasn't even trying to grow in. I was told that my goal was to have proper footwork, but I'm being condemned for having proper arm work. And we tend to do that to ourselves a lot when we are on a growth journey of our own, especially something like belief. Like I might say to myself, I'm going to redirect my belief from my old one to my new one 20 times today. And so I'm going to notice and check. I did it. I redirected 20 times. And then at the end of the day, I'm like, gosh, but I think something's wrong with me because I'm still believing that old belief. And so now I'm like mixing. I set out to do an action. My goal was to take this action 20 times. I should just be saying, hey, great job. You did it. You did exactly what you set out to do. But instead, I'm beating myself up for not having arrived. We want to avoid getting caught up in evaluating our practice of believing by being right about what happens in the future. And so that's what focus is, because you're going to be tempted to really come down on yourself if the future isn't the way that you were believing it was going to be, at least in the moment that you evaluated. Who knows if it's going to be that way out there further. But in the moment that you're evaluating, you're like, it wasn't the way that I thought. This skill needs to be twisted around. We need to have the skill of focus. We need to have the skill of focusing on exactly what we set out to do and then evaluating ourselves only on what we set out to do. The third one that we talked about is this skill of self-trust. This is my favorite. I mean, it's the reason that our membership is called Trust You. It's the reason that it's such a big part of our business. Self-trust, trusting yourself, it leads to consistency, which some might call remaining steadfast. I mean, it is literally the foundation of what Whit and I believe and what we aspire to in our lives. And one of the easiest ways I think to understand this is to think about, there's a quote from Teddy Roosevelt about the man in the arena. And he talks about it's not the critic who counts. You know, it's not the person who criticizes or has negative things to say about the man that's in the arena competing, and whether he wins or loses, that he's the one in the arena and what a big deal it is to be there. Beautiful quote. And it really is the entire concept of self-trust. of being able to build that consistency. It requires a lot of compassion, because when you're in the arena, you're not going to always win. If you feel like you're always winning, you're probably not really in the arena. That doesn't sound like very good competition to me. You want to increase the level. You want to go a little bit bigger if you feel like you're always winning. And so you're going to have some self-compassion for your errors, which was the tool that we talked about. But the skill that you're building here is really just staying in the arena. It's really admiring your ability to take the next right step after a failure. Jerry Seinfeld is actually famous for talking about this with his red X's. He talked about building a calendar and trying to build streaks on his calendar. And so there was never anything to do on a particular day except for get a red X. It didn't matter if you had 10 red X's on the previous 10 days, then your goal today is to get the 11th. It didn't matter if you had 0 red X's on the previous 10 days. Your goal on this day was to get a red X. It didn't matter if you had 9 red X's and then a blank and you're just coming off that failure. Your goal is still to get the next red X, just to build the streak, build the streak. It's a really kind of a nice way to visualize it. So whatever makes the most sense for you, taking the next step, staying in the arena, getting the next red X, you're building the skill of not having to always do it right in order to think that things are going well and you want to continue the pursuit. The fourth one is the skill of emotional maturity. And this one is the skill of choosing what you think about what you feel. I cannot tell you how many clients we coach who are in a prison of suffering because they believe they shouldn't be feeling what they're feeling. I shouldn't be feeling this craving. I shouldn't be feeling this desire. I shouldn't be feeling this resentment. Well, you are. And so you've got to be willing to take a look at that feeling, because the thing is, if you think you shouldn't be feeling it, then the problem solving you go into is how to stop feeling it or how to avoid feeling it. So this is where buffering, numbing, shortcuts, white knuckling, all these things kind of come into play, because we're trying to not feel. We think we shouldn't be feeling this. Whereas if we take on the emotional maturity of saying, I can feel anything. I understand that feeling emotion, it's a vibration in my body. I can feel it in my chest. I can feel it in my stomach. I can feel it in my head. I can feel it in my shoulders, my neck, my hands. I can feel this. I can feel this vibration. And it's okay. It's okay for it to be here. Whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, it's okay for it to be here, and I'm strong enough to feel it. That's a massive skill that prevents you from slipping into either, the hustle, grind, white knuckle kind of pressure building action, or the, numbing, buffering, checking out kind of getting stuck kind of action. Lastly, the fifth skill is the skill of self-respect. This is the skill of admiring yourself. And I said kind of on the front end, it's holding yourself to the same standards you would hold yourself when you're talking to other people, when you're talking to yourself. If you think about the horrible things that you say to yourself privately, you probably wouldn't say those to people in your life. What I've come to understand is that my confidence, it comes from what I say to myself. And it's not just what I say to myself out loud. It's not just the screensaver I have on my computer or my phone that's like an affirmation I'm repeating, trying to believe. It's what I say to myself in a whisper. It's what I say to myself in the quiet moments. It's the, yeah, but you're not really, I need to manage that. If I can manage that, then I can manage my confidence. That internal voice that's saying those things, that is you coaching you. Every time you speak to yourself, you are coaching yourself. Now, the idea is to become a world-class coach to yourself. And so if I think about coaching, what it is, it kind of comes down to two things. One is that I don't believe my clients' excuses. If I get a client in front of me and I'm like, what are the 3 reasons that this is too hard for you? And they say reason 1, 2, and 3. My job is to not believe those reasons, no matter how logical they sound. Because if I do believe them, now we're both stuck. And so my goal is to not believe their excuses. I kind of execute this belief process on their beliefs in my brain. The second part, and this is the most important part for this one, is that a world-class coach sees the max potential of the athlete. The world-class coach sees their highest self, sees their future, sees the vision of the team they're creating, and speaks to them as such. And so similarly, if you want to be a world-class coach to yourself, in the same way, that coach doesn't need the athlete in front of them to be perfect already. In the same way, a good life coach doesn't need to have their client have already achieved the dream they're going after or the transformation they desire. You don't need to already be amazing in order to talk to yourself as if you're amazing. You want to talk to your potential. And this is a skill that you're going to build, is this skill of respecting yourself, the skill of self-admiration, where you are going to start learning to speak to your highest self. And you will see that then you're giving yourself really good coaching. And great coaching makes great athletes. Those are your 5 skills. You got perspective, focus, self-trust, emotional resiliency, and self-respect. Simple when I break it down like that, but not easy. A lot of those are skills that are a journey to acquire, and it requires a lot of practice. That is what Whit and I do. That's why we're in this industry. That's why we feel so inspired to help people. It's what we spend our entire lives focusing on, is how to walk with people through this practice. In the same way that if you wanted to get skills at playing guitar, you would hire a guitar teacher. If you wanted to get skills at playing a sport, you would get a coach for that sport. We want to help people build these skills. And so people hire us to do that. And it is super rewarding, super fun. And I just want to say that if you're listening to this and you feel overwhelmed by these skills, if this feels so far away, or if you're feeling inspired and you're like, man, if I could just fine tune these, if I could get the quality reps and build these skills, I think I really could achieve this thing that I've had on my mind that I've been pursuing and haven't achieved yet. Reach out. It's really what we're here for. Whether we end up working together or not, please just contact us, ask a question on Facebook or in our email, or just comment on this video or podcast. There's nothing that we like talking about more than how to build these skills, and we would love it if you reached out. Thanks for sticking with us for all 3 parts of this series. Hey, thanks for watching this episode of Ask Steadfast. Whit and I are super excited to use this avenue to sort of spread our message. And so it would mean a ton to us if you'd subscribe to this channel. Additionally, if you have any questions you'd like to see addressed in future episodes, whether serious or funny, we'd love to see those in the comments. So leave that in the comment below, and we'll see you in the next one.